The chair now recognizes the gentleman, Representative Van Orden.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I want to thank you so much for coming here today. This is an incredibly important subject. It's phenomenal that you're putting this on. I wrote an op-ed in April 2020. I revisited it in March of 2021. It's May of 2023 now, and I'd just like to share this with you if you don't mind. It was called Freedom Over Fear, 1 year on, this one, because those two things cannot exist in the same universe. You're either free or you live in fear. And again, this is written in March of 2021. Our nation is over a year into the COVID lockdowns. What's becoming more apparent every day is that nearly every draconian measure taken by the predominantly Democrat-controlled states and municipalities have not only become counterproductive, but are actually detrimental. What started as a response to a public emergency morphed into a classic government overreach, then devolved into a series of arbitrary and capricious edicts pronounced by petty tyrants who reveled in their newfound personal political power. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, 6 months, now 3 years, now 3 feet social distancing, then 6, wear a mask, now 2, total lockdowns, now open, now lockdowns. You can't dine in a restaurant, but you can eat in an enclosed plastic bubble on a sidewalk in front of the restaurant. You can dine in, but you have to wear a mask at the table, take it off when you sit down, and then you go to the bathroom because COVID only exists in an aisle. Get vaccinated, but you still can't move about freely or be with your family. You must tell people whether or not you're vaccinated. If you say something on a ubiquitous social media not in line with the state, you're disappeared by neo-fascists pretending to be anti-fascists who zealotly ban books and you. Having the audacity to say that someone's job that is putting food on the table for their family is not essential. By ordering the physical separation of family members, threatening fines and imprisonment for holding church services or other public gatherings, closing schools, and locking our children in their homes, the government has isolated American citizens and removed the most powerful support mechanisms possible: faith, family, and friends. This is by design and is wholly un-American. These measures are clear indications that the COVID pandemic has been weaponized by unscrupulous politicians who have been able to terrify many well-meaning citizens into becoming their enforcers. It's why the nations went off the rails. During the times of crisis, men and women of faith returned to their eternal sacred text to find comfort, guidance, and peace. And in secular life, we should have returned to our foundational documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers for the very same reasons. This did not happen. We're now seeing, and we have saw, the second and third order effects of this gross omissions, and they're horrible. As I said, I penned an op-ed in 2020 centered on the 7 words from the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Basic thesis being that yesterday, today, and tomorrow, war, depression, virus or not, the meaning of those words do not change. And I paraphrased Hamilton saying that we must either stand for something or we'll fall for anything. And that's exactly what our nation did. I stand by these statements. The farther we got down the road of creating the dystopian new normal, the more people will come to realize that they did not sell their constitutional freedoms. They willingly gave them away to a series of faceless bureaucrats and politicians who became drunk on power. It's my sincere hope that my fellow Americans wake up and realize that our government cannot remove the rights that were endowed by our Creator and once again start living their lives as free men and women. The time to do so is growing short. History will show that the legislative response to SARS-CoV-19 is a combination of the series of the worst public policy blunders and the largest excuse for political power grab in the history of the world. We must hold our elected officials who champion these policies to account and get them as far away from the place of power and influence as possible. So we either believe that our rights are granted by God and are simply articulated in the Constitution, meaning that they are immutable, or we do not. Because if we believe that we can take a pause on our constitutional rights, they are by definition not immutable, which makes them arbitrary and capricious. Those are not the values that our country was founded on. They are not. I believe that our Constitution must be respected for what it is, and that's the foundational document that this nation, the greatest nation that has ever existed in the history of the world, it must be respected as such. So I want to thank the three of you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this committee meeting. I think it's possibly the most powerful thing we can do as members of Congress. And with that, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Representative Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be very clear that this issue is much more nuanced than it appears to be, and I'd like to give you an example. And I will be bragging on the state of Wisconsin. There's a statute, it's 323.10. It says the governor is capable of declaring a state of emergency, but after 60 days, it will expire automatically unless it is affirmed by a joint resolution, which is awesome. So I think that's the framework we could use. However, in the state of Wisconsin, when the governor declared an emergency for COVID, at the 60-day mark, he tried to kick the can down the road and hand it to a woman named Andrea Palm, who was the health secretary, and tried to extend the ability for him to have our state held in a state of emergency that was declared unconstitutional by the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. And here's where I must strongly and vehemently disagree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, saying that we must forget about the issues of the day and focus on the long term. The reason I say this is now Andrea Palm works for the Department of Health and Human Services under the Biden administration. So someone who tried to unconstitutionally continue the state of lockdown in the state of Wisconsin was promoted to the federal government. So in fact, we must hold people accountable directly who are responsible. They took 2 years away from our children. Drug and alcohol addiction has skyrocketed. Spousal abuse, child abuse, skyrocketing. Our kids don't know how to read any longer. They don't know how to socialize because of bureaucrats and politicians got drunk on power and they locked down our country. There are still mobile COVID test sites in Baltimore where you drive up in your car and you wait for someone to approach you to test you for COVID. Why? Because the government instilled fear in people. So we all stopped for 60 days in the state of Wisconsin and said, we are lawful citizens, we're obeying the law. But in 61 days, when the government acted unconstitutionally, we said no. And what people try to say is that you can't do both. Well, the same person that adheres to the law strictly is also the same person that stands up when the people who are governing you are not following the law. And that's the nuanced part of what's taking place here, and it's still taking place. So in fact, I want to hold the people accountable that have been doing this because they must, or it will never change. And again, I want to thank you so much. I can't believe that this hearing is not, this should be the showcase for Congress. It's unbelievable. So let me just, I want to go through each one of you real quick. Do you guys believe that the same person that adheres to these emergencies should be the same person that when they clearly violate the constitutional authority, that they're the ones that stand up and say no, that those can exist in the same universe? Mr. Dayton?
I'm sorry, I was having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you restate?
Okay, I just want to be clear, and I want to ask you, states of emergency should exist during certain periods of time. So the person that adheres to the law, when it's put down lawfully, can they be the same person that says no once those constitutional authorities have expired?
Oh, I think you can easily imagine a situation where Congress, let's say one of these reforms passed, or like happened in Wisconsin, where the legislature would say that's appropriate now, and then come to a different determination when the facts change, right? I think in many ways we saw that over the COVID national emergency here in Congress, where it went in the Senate from 49 votes last March to 68 votes this March.
Excellent.
It's the exact point that by creating a default, also an emergency declaration gives time for Congress or a legislature to to weigh in, where they may not within 24 hours or 48 hours of the onset of an emergency, but now you're creating a window and says, Congress or legislature, you have to make this choice. And if this is going to continue, then you either say yes, or if you think it's not going to, you say no. And in that case, it sounded like it was challenged by the court. A statute could be challenged if a president didn't follow the structure that was laid out.
Ma'am, Mr. Chairman, please indulge me for a second, ma'am.
Emergency powers deliberately give the president a tremendous amount of discretion, especially when taken together, in ways that Congress cannot predict how the president might choose to use them, and Congress can't predict what the circumstances will be. So I think it makes a good deal of sense to have that period of time to give the president flexibility in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, but to have that time for Congress to see how the emergency powers are being implemented and come to its own judgment about whether, first of all, they're being implemented as Congress maybe intended, but also whether emergency powers are the right way to deal with that particular circumstance. So
Excellent.
I think
Thank you,
makes
ma'am.
good sense.
So I just want to be clear that these types of things have been used for political purposes, and by painting people as extremists, you're actually attempting to remove their constitutional rights. And that's been proven over and over again. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and thank you for coming here today. I yield back.